And get started. Thank you everybody for joining us today. This is part of our PEAL Center Spring Training Series. This is the first of a few. This is transition from early intervention to kindergarten strategies for families. So we're going to be looking at moving from preschool early intervention into kindergarten and supports that families can utilize and a little bit better understanding of what that looks like. I am on. So here is this is part, again, the first one in the spring training series. Um, the transition plan is not just a form. April 29th is um, transition from high school at age 14. May 6th will be 504 plans, and May 13th will be skills for effective educational advocacy. Okay. Here's just some housekeeping. Want to point out about disclosing personal details. This meeting is being recorded. So if you have personal questions pertaining to your child or children you're working with, I will make sure that I leave my email in the chat at the end of the session. You can always reach out to the PEAL Center via online to our online intake also. And let me know if there's anything that you need or other general questions that you have. You can put that in the chat. Um, Heather is also on here helping me out today. So if she'll help read the chat for me and any technical difficulties I may have. So my name is Jane Stadnick. I am a family resource specialist here at the PEAL Center. I am also a parent of a young adult with a disability. Um, and in my previous career, I was a preschool teacher. So I've lived in the world of early childhood for a pretty long time, um, and in the world of disability with my son. This is just our PEAL Center mission. I like to point out that, our mission is that we want youth, young adults with disabilities and special health care needs to lead rich, active lives as full members of our schools and communities. And that's what we're going to talk about here is as we start out in the transition from early intervention preschool to kindergarten on how we can make um, these inclusive supports available early on so we can meet this mission. Again, just the objectives to our training today. Um, just know some of the differences between preschool early intervention and school age programs. Um, a little bit of difference between the IEP as it transitions into school age, um, the importance of informed decision making when you're discussing educational placement, and this centers around your child's right to inclusive supports in school. Oh, the poll already. Okay, I'm going to throw up a poll. Here's going to be the first question. Um, how much do you feel you already know about your child's new school? And if you give me a second, I will put up the actual poll and see if we can get this to work right. Oh, awesome. Can everyone see the poll? Yep, thanks. Okay. And what aspects of your child's new classroom are you most concerned about? Making sure support's into a place. So there's some very little, but mostly some. We know a little bit about our child's new school, and the aspects are making sure the supports are in place, right? I'm gonna end that. I'll share the results with you. Let me scroll down just in case. Alrighty. And we talked about that. And so this is when we think about this is making sure the support's in place. And that's you know a an important aspect of making sure your child is included is having the proper supports in place. So we're going to start a little bit with the basics, the differences between systems, ensuring inclusion, and the preparation to make the transition to kindergarten. So preschool early intervention eligibility um, is a little different than school age eligibility. Um, to be qualified under preschool early intervention, a child can have a developmental delay or a specific diagnosis as described by PA regulations. So that's a little different, and we'll see that as we move through the webinar about what school age eligibility looks like. And the second part of that is in need of specially designed instruction. So these are, excuse me, sorry. These are the different IDEA categories of disability. So IDEA is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, and these are the categories listed to help qualify your child for special education services. So just keep this in mind. And here's the school age eligibility. And this is where it varies a little bit from the early intervention preschool eligibility. You will notice, if I'm going to jump back, that we qualify under one of the categories of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. These are the categories. You will notice on here that developmental delay is not listed. So that is one of the biggest factors as we transition from preschool early intervention into school age eligibility. Again, your two-prong under special education is you qualify under one of the categories and you're in need of specially designed instruction. Here's the difference in evaluations. Um, the initial evaluation, the timeline, right, is within the same amount, 60 calendar days. But the difference in the evaluations, when you're in preschool early intervention, all students are reevaluated every 2 years. Under the school age guidelines, a reevaluation must be completed every 3 years unless your child has an intellectual disability, and then they're reevaluated every 2 years. And if you have questions, not personal directed questions, but questions you can add to the chat, and we will make sure we leave time to answer them. Again, here are some differences. During programming, the school calendar in preschool early intervention looks a little different than the school age. The entry level obviously is different in preschool early intervention. Children may enter services on their third birthday. Um, for school age, it's decided by the school district, but the start of the compulsory age in Pennsylvania is 6 years old. The school calendar also looks different. So in early intervention, 12-month programming, they don't have breaks longer than 3 weeks. In school, we have a 180-day calendar, and students with individual education plans in special education are considered for extended school year. That's some supports during that long break that we have during the summer and the other breaks throughout the year, Christmas or spring break or winter break. Okay, so we're getting ready to make the jump from preschool to kindergarten. And that's always, I think it's more scary for parents than it is for the kids. Um, but the early intervention entity, so your EI staff, your child's EI staff must send you a notice a year in advance about the need to transition to your district's program or charter school and schedule a transition meeting by the end of February to select school placement. So you're going to have a transition meeting the February prior to when your child is supposed to start kindergarten. What should be happening is this when you send out this notice for the year in advance, your child's early intervention preschool team should be looking at your child's preschool IEP and talking about supports and services looking forward to kindergarten. So that whole year prior to kindergarten should be building up to the skills and goals we need to work on for kindergarten. And I I can go back a little bit. That even though the compulsory age for Pennsylvania is 6, it just means that a child has to start school at 6. We start at 5 for kindergarten. Kindergarten is actually not a mandated grade in the state of Pennsylvania. So there are some kids who start out um, later. So, but at 5 years, they would still get services. And we'll cover that a little bit moving forward. So in the chat, have you received notice of your transition meeting? Yes, the notice will be sent assuming the child will start at age 5. And then the transition meeting should include your uh, preschool um, case manager, your preschool early intervention case manager, and the school district. So everybody should have, if your child is going to kindergarten in the fall, you should have already had this transition meeting and these conversations should have already taken place. And if they haven't, you're going to reach out to me. And here are the options for your child's transition. So we transition into kids with special education services in preschool transition based on these options into kindergarten. So a child remains eligible for preschool, eligible for school age special education if they are still eligible under preschool early intervention, registered for their school district, and are and still qualify under the reevaluation. So if your child's getting reevaluated under preschool early intervention, they would still have to qualify in order to meet the need to have special education services in school. And there are 3 options in which your child transitions over. And I'll actually move past this one. We'll talk about adopting the preschool IEP and the evaluation report. So say your child has just been evaluated in the early intervention preschool. So literally like 6 months ago. Your child's IEP team, that's the parents in the school district, can decide to adopt the EI preschool evaluation report and implement that as the child's school age IEP. That means it will not change from preschool moving into kindergarten. Okay. Once the team decision is made, the school district will issue a notice of recommended educational placement. That the abbreviation is NOREP. You'll hear a lot about that. It's where you get to agree or disagree with the recommendation. These are part of your procedural safeguards, which are your parental rights. And this is, I will drop a link in the chat at the end so you know what this looks like. The second option is to adopt the IEP with revision. So the parents and school district members can decide to adopt the early intervention preschool IEP, but make revisions. That means they're taking the preschool early intervention evaluation and IEP and saying, yes, we want to use this, but we think we need some revisions, right? So this is an option also. The third option would be to conduct a full reevaluation. So the IEP determines that a reevaluation is necessary, right? And the school district notifies the parent in writing that a reevaluation will be conducted. So, and this notification must occur within a reasonable amount of time um, after the parent completes the intent to register. So you don't have to be registered. You have to have an intent to register with your school district. Um, in a reasonable amount of time, we hold to 30 days, but you're having this transition meeting in February to talk about these options. Um, and at that point, if you're going to go with this third option to conduct a reevaluation, the reevaluation should begin by April, right? Because then that gives the school district time before the end of the school year, because those 60 calendar days do not include summer. All right. So we want should be at a reasonable amount of time. And it begins with a review of existing data. And what that means is they're going to review the evaluation from preschool early intervention, all of the progress monitoring on the goals in your child's preschool IEP. And then they will re request permission from you as the parent if there needs to be more testing done or different assessments done. So if the review of existing data does not give them enough information or they don't feel it gives them enough information, they will send out a permission to evaluate further. And a parent may also request a reevaluation from before kindergarten. So it's not just the school district. You as a parent can also request. So when we look at the three options, you remember you're an integral part of your child's um, special education team, right? And you have the option to request a reevaluation also. So a reevaluation report is issued to, again, we talked about it, summarizing the data, providing information or about additional data if needed, and it determines continued eligibility for special education. And so that's the reason we're doing the evaluation, is to make sure that this child still continues to be eligible for special education. If the child is found eligible for school age special education, we will convene an IEP meeting within 30 calendar days of the date of the report. This assures a smooth transition to school age programs, and the new IEP will be developed. So it will not be the preschool IEP. If you're having a new reevaluation, then your child will get a new IEP, and they will issue that notice of recommended educational placement for you to agree or disagree with. And here we'll talk a little bit about transition strategies. Again, um, sometimes these larger transitions are sometimes more worrisome for parents than they are for the student. And the student's IEP should guide what supports, the evaluation and IEP should guide what supports are needed. But let's talk a little bit about collaborating with your EI and preschool staff to create a transition plan. So each child, starting the year before they're going to kindergarten, should have a transition plan inside of their preschool IEP. You could schedule visiting days um, to familiarize and to identify needs for support. So those visiting the school, your typical kindergarten readiness. Sometimes our kindergartens now have summer camp. Um, my kids called them boot camp, but summer camp. So a child that's going into kindergarten can experience some of the day of kindergarten looks like. Okay. Um, you can create a portfolio about your child to share with your child's teachers. We call that a one pager. Um, there is an example that I believe I can pull up. I want to preface that it doesn't have to be elaborate. This is just an introduction um, to your child. Let me see if I can pull this up. Okay. All right. This is about Mia. Her mom so nicely shared it with us. Um, I'm going to scroll down through it. Again, it doesn't have, this is really pretty and elaborate, but it really could be just a one pager. What are my child's strengths? What are my child's weaknesses? What are they working on? What motivates them? You know, what do they like? Do they bring something to school every day? What's their comfort item? But I will just do a quick scroll through this. This is just an introduction to Mia. It's what you feel that your child's teachers would like to know, right? Or what would help them support your child. Um, as my child got older, we put this in their hands. So, if they get old enough, they want to talk about what their favorite thing is. They want to shoot a video and share the video. But these are just a good way to introduce your child to their teacher or to their other support staff that's coming into school. Right, I'll keep scrolling through here. And it talks about her strengths. It talks about some of the things that she's working on. Um, I love the added picture, so I always add a picture to my child's one pager. But again, it talks about her interests, um, what really motivates her, you know, and then some of the things that may look a little different, right? This talks about, I might look defiant, but this is what I'm doing. Um, sometimes kids don't respond right away to their name. Maybe we have some auditory processing. It takes us a minute, but um, it really just gives you a breakdown of how to support Mia, right? And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for um, just a way to um, support um, support her. All right. Oops, sorry. Okay. Let me go to the next slide. And here's where this inclusive part starts to happen, right? These are where these supports come into play. Um, we want to um, get started off in an inclusive space, right? We want our children to be included with their peers um, and make the same strides, right? We want them to have the same access to curriculum, the same choices as everybody else in their community. And it really starts here in kindergarten. And this is just the concept of inclusion illustrated. We talk about exclusion where all of our students with disabilities are on the outside of the classroom. So um, this is just kind of a view, like the little blue dots are what you would consider the classroom. Um, we talk about where exclusion, they're completely out. They're not even in the school building, right? So we're out. Segregation is that we're in the school or we're in the classroom, but maybe we're separated, outside into a specialized room. Integrated is when we have access to the general education classroom, but you can see the little dots. We're inside the classroom, but we're all together. And then inclusion is when we're all dispersed in the classroom, together. The link here, and I will add it to the chat at the end, is um, the framework for access and belonging. This is um, put in by Pat, and maybe I can pull it up. I'll give it a shot. Oh, yep, there we go. All right. So this is a priority for inclusion. And this talks about the framework for access and belonging. Again, I can link the um, access to this website. There is actually one for parents and one for professionals. Go back to the PowerPoint. And here's the rationale for inclusive education. Um, First of all, least restrictive environment. We're going to see that a lot. It's the LRE, and it's the law. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act says a child must be educated in what we consider their least restrictive environment. Okay. And that is, we take least restrictive environment to mean we're going to start a general education, right? With all of those supports and services that we can talk about in that framework to access and belonging. We call those the supplementary aids and services, are those supports that our child gets in general education, what they need, like things like, your speech, your occupational therapy, physical therapy. What else? What other supports does your child need inside of that classroom? Um, Schools should mirror our communities. We used to joke that there was like no special education Walmart for my child to work in after school, that being included with their peers is what communities look like. Um, and inclusive education benefits all students. So not just students with disabilities, but the other students in the classroom without disabilities also benefit from, a lot of times, from some of the supports and services, but also as a community itself. If you are a person that maybe later in life um, has a business, and you are hiring and a person with a disability applies for a job at your business, and you have been included with students with disabilities during school, it is found that it's more likely that you will hire a person with a disability because they were not segregated, that they were included. So not only are we talking about stuff that's just about kindergarten, but these decisions have lifelong effect even after your K through 12 experience. Okay, this is just, again, least restrictive environment. In the regular classroom with appropriate aids and supports. Every IEP team should first ask the question, how can the student special education supports and services be provided within the general education classroom? So we talk about a continuum, but we should always start with, what are the supports and services that my child needs to be successful in a general education kindergarten classroom? According to the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, special education is not a place. It's not a classroom. It's not a prepackaged program. It's a service. It's a service for children rather than a place they are sent. So all of the services that we talk about can be delivered in general education settings. That's what they're meant to do. Again, special education isn't a room. It's a service. Making inclusion happen, right? So How it happens is through your child's individualized education programs. All right. It is that IEP and the goals and the accommodations and the supplemental aids and services that are listed there that support your child in general education kindergarten or through K through 12. So um, we the strongest thing is we're looking at goals. Goals in your child's individualized education program, that's the IEP. They must be, we call them SMART goals, right? They're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, and they're results oriented, and they're time bound, right? The goal includes performance criteria, like when is it going to happen? Um, what is the child going to do? Is the goal realistic? Um, can you measure it? If I were to pick up a child's IEP, would I be able to read this goal and go, I can measure this progress? And it should be specific to the skill or subject area that the child is working on. So we want it to be specific, what the child is going to do. We need to know how it's going to be measured and make sure it can be measured. We want it to be attainable, right? So IEP goals are written for that school calendar year, right? So we have um, an annual IEP meeting, right? As a parent, you can request that you have more than one IEP meeting, but there has to be one that is done annually. And so we want to make sure that the goals that we are writing are perceived to be attainable in that calendar year. So, say a child has he's starting out at a baseline on sight words. And he's currently the baseline, he's mastered 20%. Um, the attainable wouldn't be 100%, right? It would be, we would start with maybe 60%. And then when that was attainable within the year, we would move to 80 or 100% or 90%. But it just was attainable within the calendar year. Results oriented, we want to make sure that we state exactly what we want the child to do. And sometimes we see this in um, goals surrounding behavior. It'll be like um, Johnny won't kick, right? So Johnny won't kick his peer. Well, nobody wants Johnny to kick his peer. What we need to talk about is what we want Johnny to do, right? We want Johnny to enter into play by asking, can I play? Right. And that would be a way that we're looking for results. We want to know will, what we want the child to do, not what we don't want them to do. So again, it includes performance criteria. How's that child going to meet that goal? When are we going to measure it? And as a parent, you're going to get feedback on these goals typically quarterly. It will be also written in your IEP. There is a question in the chat that I want to address before we move on. For a student under the intellectual disability category, can there be academic goals in each subject area or more than one goal per subject area, or a goal that can be adapted throughout the day? So we wouldn't be adapting throughout the day, but you could have more than one goal per subject area. Um, and you and if a child with um, an intellectual disability would have a main goal, and then they would have objectives to that goal. So they would have short-term objectives leading up to the goal. So it would break down the goal even further if you have a student with an intellectual disability. We talked about a little bit before about the framework for access and belonging, and I discussed a little bit about supplementary aids and services and the least restrictive environment. And this gives us a guideline of what we're looking for. So supplementary aids and supports, remember we talked about those specially designed instruction. We talked about like accommodations. What does a child need to access their classroom? Um, do they need speech? Do they need OT? Do they need specialized transportation? There's not an exhaustive list, but there's a list of supplementary aids and services. Um, and here we always start here, right? That we are 100% of the time in general education. All right. And 100% of the time with non-disabled peers. Again, we don't start the opposite way where we're starting in a separate classroom and earning our way into general education. We want to start looking at our child's placement at general education and what supports and services can we put into place that will support them as an inclusive member of their kindergarten community. Again, the most important part, and this was in our poll too, making sure the adequate supports are in place. And this is it. Offer strategies, again, to how your child will be supported by adults. That one pager is a really great way to look at that. That you're specific about how your child will effectively communicate their needs, right? So, how does your child communicate? Do they use a device to communicate? Do they use sign language to communicate? Do they use a combination? Do they talk? Um, what is the way your child communicates? Your job is to offer strategies about your child, um, how they successfully interact with others. Does your child shy away from peers at first? Does your child greet them enthusiastically? Um, you know, as part of your child's IEP team, you're an integral part. You have this knowledge of your child that the rest of the people sitting around the table may not have. Um, you provide concrete steps towards how your child will be included across routines and activities with typical peers, right? So this is what we're looking at when we're talking about supplemental aids and services. How do they help our child be included? How do they help our child interact? How do they help our child communicate? And how do they help how do they support the adults to help the child? Again, here a little bit about the framework for access and belonging. Um, again, I'll pop this up real quick, but that isn't the link that we want. But what we can do is I'll put a link to the whole framework for accessing belonging in the chat at the end of the webinar. Um, and this is so when I say framework for access and belonging, without seeing it, it's a little bit hard to understand. But it is literally a guide and a meeting that you would have with your child's team about what are those supports and services that will help your child access general education. Thanks, Heather, for putting that in the timeline. Um, let me continue on. And here's just we know the research, right? We know that family involvement matters. Um, all the research points to children doing better when families are involved in education. And that's including children with or without disabilities. All children thrive when family is involved. And we like to talk about this, family is the constant in a child's life. The people in the school, teachers come and go, support services come and go. Your family is the constant. Um, and and as your child is part of your family, um, you don't have a special education guideline. Um, for your family. We're a family. Um, my child is one of four, and his siblings did not treat him differently, which helped him out much as he went to school. But we prepare for the future. Um, and this comes back to that one pager, that family's vision for the child. Um, we talked about the IEP going back, that the IEP is written for a year's worth of progress. So our vision as families and the vision of the school are always two different things. When I'm looking at my child, my vision, it's not 1 year, it's 5 years. I'm looking to see what my child's doing a couple years down the line. So that's the importance of getting our vision across to our support systems at school, is because they're 1 calendar year, mine is 5. So we always are preparing for, as families, we're always preparing for what our child's future looks like. And this is why it's really important, um, as a family, to be equal partners with your child's educational team. Here are just some valuable resources. The transition process from early intervention to school age there's a publication, um, most through Patton. If you have a child who is blind or visually impaired, there are special considerations for children who are deaf and hard of hearing. Also, um, again, we'll send up a follow-up email, it looks like, for some of these other resources. Again, obviously, there's a ton of resources available. And if you're having a problem finding a resource, or maybe have some other questions, again, we'll be available here at the PEAL Center to send that stuff out. Even if it doesn't come out in the resource email, feel free to reach out. Okay. And here is the framework for access and belonging. This is one that I would encourage every family to look at. This will help you determine what supports and services are needed in kindergarten. This is a really good think tank way to approach inclusion in kindergarten. Again, if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to a family resource specialist. We're across the state. You can reach us via there's a phone number on our website, but there's also an online intake that we get to also. And I'm just going to leave this evaluation. If you could scan the QR code to do evaluation, we are federally funded through the Office of Special Education Programs, and our services to families are free. So if you could fill out that evaluation, that gives us that information. And if you want, I'm going to go back to the chat and look at questions. If you have other questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll read them from there. Oh, there's one about a co-taught class. I love co-taught classes. Not every school district does that. Um, but there are a lot of school districts that push in. They don't necessarily call it a co-taught class, but they push into the class. So a special education teacher is available in the classroom. Not necessarily all day, but they push in. And there are sections in your child's IEP that talks about supports for school personnel. And you can also, when you talk about that in the IEP meeting, um, having the special education teacher and the general education teacher set some time to talk about what supports and services are needed in that general education classroom. But this is when you ask if you can bring something up in an IEP meeting, you just bring something up in an IEP meeting. This is part of um, being an informed decision maker, right? Or asking these questions, making these suggestions, understanding what works well for your child. Um, in your child's individualized education program, there is a section in the beginning under present levels of academic performance, and it's your parental concerns. You could add that to your parental concerns. I think my child would do really well in a co-taught structured classroom, you know, and then let's brainstorm about how we can make this happen or how we can make it look similar to what we see in co-taught classrooms.
Jane, there was a question sent in a direct message to me.
Oh, okay.
Is it possible to opt out of EI services, or perhaps there was no IEP due to later diagnosis? And what can parents do to get IEP evaluation prior to kindergarten starting?
So I would reach out right now to your school district. That's what you have to do. So you would reach out, ask your child, you'd be an intent to register your child for kindergarten and request a special education evaluation. You can do that right now. So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has what we call child find, and it tasks school districts with finding children with disabilities. So even if you are not enrolled in the school, say you were at a private school, it is still under the onus of the school district to do an evaluation of the child. So reach out to the school district that you're living in. You'll probably have to proof of residency that you live in the district and request and tell them your concerns. Request a special education evaluation. And if it doesn't happen now, or if it's a little late, they have 60 calendar days. That timeline still applies, and then 30 days to put an IEP in place. If you're running late, I would still reach out to the school district. They have a special education director most of the time, um, or even just the principal of the school, but they they are not union contract, so administration should be there during the summer, to reach out them and to start that process right away on the beginning of kindergarten. Okay. Don't let it get too far into kindergarten if you think that there are going to be supports and services needed. If your child has an outside diagnosis, you can share that information with the school ahead of time also. Any other question? We have a couple of minutes.
There was another question in the chat. When should transition, when should the transition plan be put into place?
So that should happen a year before the child is scheduled to go to kindergarten. Okay. We want to be working on those skills, right, for kindergarten. We want to know what that transition looks like. So, say you have a kiddo that has a hard time, sitting still, right? Which, really all kids that age tend to have a hard time sitting still. But if that's a goal that you need to be working on, right? What are some of the supports and services that that child would need? Does he need to work with an occupational therapist? Does he maybe need a specialized seat as he goes into kindergarten? We should be planning those things out prior to going to school. Does your child have a hard time standing in line? Do they need to be at the front or the back of the line? We can start working on those things prior to going to kindergarten. So a year before that should get started. Basically, as your child turns 4. Okay, so I don't think my son has a transition plan. So it would be in your child's current IEP, and there would be a section that says transition plan. And Sherry, if you don't see it in there, you can send me an email and I'll look for it for you. Okay. Okay. So can I talk about Okay, and yeah, the transition plan would be started by your early intervention providers. Any other questions? Again, my email's on here. You can use our PEAL Center online. Um, I, thank you guys for attending and staying on. Again, we have a few more in this series. They're not dealing with early intervention, but again, we will attach that to the um, email that we send out or the rest of the spring trainings.